Hi everybody. Today we'll be talking about Arthur Chickering's theory of identity development. So in the late 1950s and 60s, Arthur Chickering worked at Goddard College, where he was responsible for evaluating the impact of innovative curricular practices on student development. Pretty cool job, huh? He also worked in the late 1960s as the director for the Project on Student Development in Small Colleges. Again, cool job. This guy actually is a giant in the field, and what we're going to learn about his theory, I think, doesn't even begin to capture all there is to learn from Chickering. He wrote a really great book a couple years ago called Cool Passion, and I have it, and you're welcome to borrow it if you like. It's fantastic. Okay, so Goddard had received a huge Ford Foundation grant to study innovative approaches to education. The grant proposal essentially committed Goddard to undertake the study of college students' experiences in a way that maximized their learning according to the quirky little school's educational philosophy. That philosophy articulated 5 vectors of change that Goddard sought to facilitate. And Chickering's research, including a barrage of assessments, student diaries, and interviews, led to the articulation of 2 more. After a few years on the project on student development in small colleges, Chickering decided to bring the influence of the college environment into the discussion. Chickering, with his partner Linda Reiser, wrote a book called Education and Identity, and this is really important, with faculty in mind specifically. His goal was to encourage faculty to be more intentional about affecting student development. All right, so think about this. At the time, many faculty members saw themselves as being only responsible for the students' learning related to their specific course subject material. And Chickering wanted them to be promoting the holistic development of students, not just to have them acquire the knowledge that the faculty member had, but to grow and develop as individuals. In 1971, in the Empire State College Bulletin, Chickering wrote, "Despite wide differences in age, backgrounds, and special needs or interests, most students will share a number of basic goals: developing competence, increasing awareness, developing purpose, becoming autonomous, understanding oneself, understanding others, and developing integrity. Although at times one goal looms larger than another, they will remain the work of human development throughout life. Because these will be major objectives for many students, though perhaps only dimly perceived by some," that's important, we'll talk about that in class, "they must be served by the policies, programs, and practices of the college." Chickering and Reiser saw their book as a pitch for a more developmentally minded set of policies and practices, or as Chickering calls it, higher education's organizing purpose. All right, Chickering proposed 7 vectors of development, described several environmental influences, and introduced 3 admonitions. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, vectors. All right, so check out this quote on page 66 in your book. Chickering used the term vectors because each seems to have a direction and magnitude, even though the direction may be expressed more appropriately by a spiral or by steps than a straight line. And then we're talking about highways, and I'm thinking about fusilli pasta and spiral staircases, and I'm super lost. Add to that the idea that students may develop and then realize that they didn't, and then recycle their spiral stair-stepping, and the vectors interact but are not sequential, but are sort of sequential since they increase in complexity, and now words have no meaning. Okay, so here's the scoop as far as this class is concerned. The vectors are a comprehensive picture of psychosocial development during the college years. They are a list of areas in which one might develop. See, that's nice. Development in each area is different. And I harbor the belief that the spiral and staircase nonsense was all just the result of pressure from Chickering's publisher to make his vectors sound like a proper theory. So we're going to focus on the idea that these vectors are just areas of development. Let's explore them, shall we? There are three types of competence: intellectual, physical, and interpersonal. As far as I know, this is the only theory that we'll study that includes physical competence, which I find super interesting. Maybe it's the recreation professional in me, but I love the idea that college students should learn how to play sports, dance, work with their hands, and so on. Actually physically do things. Intellectual competence and interpersonal competence, you can go into more detail on that in your book if you like, and we may do that in class, but probably they are what you think they are. All right, managing emotions. Recognizing, accepting, expressing, and controlling emotions. Acting appropriately in response to feelings. Note that Chickering originally was focused on sexual desire and aggression, but more recent conception includes these as well as anxiety, depression, guilt, care, inspiration, and others. All right, moving through autonomy toward interdependence. In this vector, students move away from a reliance on others for reassurance, affection, and approval, as well as a reliance on others to solve problems, and toward making one's own way in the world. The interdependence bit kicks in when students realize the value and necessity of being connected to others. Think about this. Students shouldn't rely on their parents to submit housing work orders or wake them up from their naps, but neither should students totally sever their relationships with their parents. Or in a romantic context, we don't want anyone to be totally dependent on and subservient to their boyfriend or girlfriend, but we also don't want people to swear off romantic relationships altogether. Speaking of relationships, for Chickering and Reiser, developing mature interpersonal relationships involves the tolerance and appreciation of differences and the capacity for intimacy. Note, one requirement is that an individual have tolerance and appreciation of difference. Another requirement is that the individual has a capacity for intimacy. This is simple but also elegant, I think. You may hear people make extreme comments about maintaining boundaries and whatnot, but rigid rules about keeping your distance for professional purpose seems to me to be a sign that an individual has the potential to develop in this area. I think this capacity for intimacy thing is another real strength of the theory, like physical competence. Chickering speaks of the ability to be vulnerable, to be a true partner, to demonstrate honesty and respect, to resist defensiveness and competition, to consider romantic and sexual encounters from not only one's own perspective, but from the perspective of the other person. I haven't been a college student in a while, but from what I see, this seems like pretty relevant stuff, and it seems like an area where students are really, thirsty for development and for assistance. We're going to do a lot with establishing identity this semester, so suffice to say that this vector is about comfort with oneself, one's sense of heritage, one's role, and one's lifestyle. In the developing purpose vector, students develop vocational goals, identify personal interests, and commit to interpersonal and family relationships. In my dissertation, I found that students really understood their development in college as being closely related to their sense of purpose. In a book that we'll read next semester in Trends, one student reflects on her interest in the outdoors as a major outcome of her college experience. In college, I personally developed a real love for film and literature. Other students may learn that they want to start a family or really want to improve their relationships with parents or loved ones. As opposed to other vectors, this vector seems to be more focused on the future. Okay, so the developing integrity vector actually has a proper description of how one develops. It's a little bit more like a traditional development theory. There are 3 stages: humanizing values, personalizing values, and developing congruence. In the first stage, students incorporate their understanding of others into their sense of right and wrong, and consider the interests of others when making moral judgments. So, have you ever heard of the hungry thief problem? What should we do if we catch a man stealing who steals to feed his starving children? In a sort of pre-stage to this vector, someone might quickly say, stealing is wrong, lock the man up. But in this first stage, humanizing values, the student considers the plight of the man, the children, and wrestles with the dilemma. She may still lock the man up, but she will likely recognize that either choice is problematic. In the second stage, students begin to adapt existing value structures, the law, scripture, for instance, to create a more personalized value system. Finally, the students' actions reflect these value systems, and students work to balance their self-interest with the responsibilities of their community. Okay, so that does it for the vectors. You'll be responsible for being able to name all 7, for having a good grasp of what each means, and for all of the components. For instance, the developing integrity stages and the 3 types of competence. Next up, Chickering describes 7 key influences, features of the college environment that influence students' development. These are interesting and useful, particularly for the assignments related to program design later on this semester. They include institutional objectives, institutional size, student-faculty relationships, curriculum, teaching, friendships and communities, and student development programs and services. Now, this seems like, pretty much everything. Remember, Chickering's purpose in developing this theory was to help teachers and administrators better promote development. Clear objectives are good, small size is good, relationships are good, a smart curriculum is good, etc. All right, you're not going to be quizzed on these, so you don't have to remember these 7, but I encourage you to think about how your specific undergrad institution's variables here, right? Your institution's size, the way the curriculum is set up, your friendships and communities, the way those things influence your development in any of the 7 vectors. Finally, Chickering and Reiser introduced the 3 admonitions that underscore the development and maintenance of developmental college environments. Now, note that an admonition is a gentle or friendly reproof. It is a comment made to someone that you worry may not be making the right decision. It's when I tell my son that he can try to build his Lego tower even higher, but that he shouldn't be surprised if it falls. It is what I might do when I remind a cab officer to attend the operations meeting he missed last week. It's a little condescending, honestly, but so it is. Okay, so according to Chickering and Reiser, we must integrate student learning with their work, be it work on campus or in the community. This will help improve students' learning by leveraging an experience that is relevant to them, and if we can link learning to work during their college years, then while students are out working after graduation, hopefully they will continue to learn as a normal way of going about their work. Reflection conversations are designed to do just this, to create reflective experiences that will connect students' academic experiences and their career goals to their work on campus or in a student organization or what have you. We must also recognize and respect individual differences. This seems like common sense now, but 23 years ago it was not a foregone conclusion that difference and diversity would be major topics. I can tell you that when I was in college, we did very little to ensure that differences were recognized and respected. This recognition and respect, argue Chickering and Reiser, should pervade all aspects of institutional planning, teaching, and service delivery. Finally, we must acknowledge the cyclical nature of learning and development. We should not check off a box and assume that a student is done learning that thing. We must not in our heads move a student to the next stage in development, because they might need to learn those same lessons again. You should make sure to remember these admonitions. Now, there are a number of concerns about Chickering's theory, but in my opinion, most revolve around the fact that it was developed in the 60s and that it's not always what people want it to be. If you take it as a comprehensive look at the ways in which students might and should develop during college, it's really useful. All right, that's it for Chickering. Let me know if you have questions, but otherwise, I'll see you in class.